Now, one of the most subtle ways, yet deeply harmful ways, erasure operates is when our celebrations, our festivals, traditions, and holidays are dismissed, distorted, or outright banned in public spaces. While other religious and cultural observances are widely recognized, Hindu students on college campuses often face pushback when trying to celebrate their traditions. This can take many forms, festivals being labeled as casteist, politically twisted, or even excluded altogether under the guise of neutrality. But what does this mean for Hindu youth? What does it feel like to watch your traditions become invisible or misrepresented in spaces meant to be inclusive? And our next panel, Celebrating Hindus Out of Existence, will explore how this erasure is enacted on college campuses and its impact on Hindu American youth. We are honored to welcome the following: Dr. Smita Rajji, an economist and education advocate who has been a strong voice for Hindu representation in academia and institutional spaces. Pushpita Prasadji, a communications professional and a leader at CoHNA, where she works to challenge anti-Hindu bias in media and education. Abhimanyu Gupta ji, a representative from the CoHNA Youth Action Network, who will bring personal experiences as a Hindu American high school student. Together, they will shed light on the challenges Hindu students face and how we can push back against this form of cultural erasure. Now, please join me in welcoming Smita ji, Pushpita ji, and Abhimanyu ji. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste, everybody. We are very excited to be here and share our findings today about how Hindus are being celebrated out of existence. And as we were very kindly introduced, you know, sometimes the more subtle forms of Hinduphobia are also very effective because we don't get our guard up and we kind of go along with the ride till it's almost too late. And what happens when Hindu elements are erased from Hindu festivals in the West? And that's kind of what our analysis is going to look at today. So we'll start off by just setting the stage in terms of why festivals are important, and specifically why festivals are important to dharmic practice, because festivals are a way that we build community and we strengthen our family bonds, which is how most of our festivals are oriented. A lot of our festivals, or most of them, are also very deeply rooted. They have a long history behind them. There are some complex spiritual traditions that can vary from region to region, family to family, each with its long history of supporting scriptures and rituals. And while they build community, I think a lot of our festivals also foster connections across prevailing socioeconomic barriers. That's a very important role they play using dharmic elements. They're connected to deeper cycles of cosmology, theology, and nature, which kind of reminds us of the holistic, grounded faith that we come from. And very importantly, especially in the diaspora, festivals are one of the few occasions when we publicly embrace our Hindu identity. And that's not just us talking, right? I was reading this article last Navratri in New India Abroad, and this article just jumped out at me from a 10th grader who talked about why Indian festivals were so important for teenagers growing up in the US. And this quote to me summed up the problem, right? Or the potential, and why these festivals open themselves to the kind of attacks we are going to see. Because, as she wrote, on an everyday basis, we are forced to connect to our culture through our parents who've lived there and experienced the culture firsthand. But the festivals offer a way to individually connect to our culture. And I think that's why we see this very concerted effort as we look in the next slide. As to why the diaspora finds its festivals under attack, as I said earlier, it's a visible and it's one of the few times you have a public embrace of your faith. When you light your diyas for Diwali or you put up your lights, all your neighbors know that you are practicing a different faith. When you throw colors, it's very visible. When you do a puja and go to your office, or you talk about, your Navratri dance, your Navratri puja or your Diwali things, it gives you a different identity from your day-to-day interactions of, discussing projects or technologies or what have you. And festivals thus became a huge part of the lived experience of becoming Hindu, being Hindu. And they connect us to our history in a very personal and direct ways. I just use this as an example because if you look at this excerpt from Niccolo di Conti, an Italian traveler who visited Hampi in the 1400s, you find him describing a festival, which is very clearly, if you read the description, Holi. I think if he were to visit India today, he would probably describe Holi very similarly, maybe replace the king or something else. And he specifically mentions how saffron was being used heavily in Hampi. And when I Googled Holi in Hampi, this was one of those signature pictures that popped up. You notice the preponderance of the same colors. So not really that much has changed, and that's a powerful thread. So Smita, do you want to take us to the next section?
Yeah, namaste and a warm welcome to everybody. As a part of our lived experience in the diaspora, we just have to look around and spot the delinking and de-Hinduization of Hindu festival. And this is pretty much the mechanism we are seeing on the operation of the erasure. Especially conspicuous is the absence of a Hindu in the context of Hindu festival. This is happening in media, this is happening in university campuses, community celebrations in our neighborhood, and also and especially in private ticketed events around us. Here is an example on the screen. These are events on campus or the community events, and the biggest part missing is the Hindu and the lack of acknowledgement of the Hindu roots of Diwali and Holi in these examples. And this is by no means an anomaly, pretty much the norm out there. Moving forward, we have an extremely problematic portrayal of Hindu festivals in the media. Case point is New York Times. The New York Times published a long piece on Diwali Mithai, but there is not one word or one word mentioning Hindu. They are pretty much delinking Diwali from its Hindu roots. But there are other connections being made, South Asia and secular sounding Festival of Lights. Unfortunately, this characterization by a major media platform like New York Times trickles down, and regional and local media picks it up, and that becomes the dominant narrative around our festivals. Moving forward, along with the conspicuous absence of Hindu, there is a reductionary emphasis on regional and secular elements. As we saw in the New York Times piece, Diwali is a secular festival of lights, and Holi similarly becomes festival of colors. And there is a spurious association that cannot be missed of Hindu festivals with South Asia. The other problem we see is commercialization and asset stripping. Next slide, please. Yeah.
No, we'll come back to that later. Yeah. Abhi, you want to just speak to your side?
So as we can see here, the White House Diwali party played Madhuri Dixit's Choli Ke Piche Kya Hai. And when I first saw this, I was extremely shocked because I was wondering, what did this song have to do with the sentiment of Diwali when we are taught that Bhagwan Ram returned back to Ayodhya? What did Choli Ke Piche Kya Hai have to do with the White House Diwali party, the seemingly largest Diwali party in the entire country, the highest level of it? This even led to my American friends having the reaction that this is what Diwali was about, and that Diwali seemingly portrayed such topics, and Diwali was all centered around dancing and such topics around it.
So I think we already touched, so we've seen a growing trend of South Asiafication. That's kind of what our media analysis is bringing up over and over again. And we just want to take a minute to point out how this South Asiafication is not only insidious, but it's flat out wrong. It just defies any logic because if South Asia is a vast and diverse place, and many parts of South Asia, you will not find any celebrations of Diwali, Holi, etc. And frankly, in some parts of South Asia, it's very, very dangerous to celebrate Diwali or Holi. So when the media turns these very specifically Hindu festivals into South Asia festivals, they're actually looking for ways to sort of whitewash and negate the violence that is being perpetrated against Hindu minorities in these countries, as is quite evident. And on the other hand, if you move away from South Asia and you look at some vibrant Diwali celebrations outside of South Asia, what do you find? Well, there's that H word common through all of these, right? All of these countries have vibrant Hindu communities, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's Thailand, whether it's London, New York, Guyana, Suriname, etc. So it just defies logic, and I think it goes to the insidiousness of the Hinduphobia through erasure that is being inflicted. Smita ji?
The other facet of this problem is asset stripping and commercialization. This is how the mechanism works, as we see. The delinking and dehinduized secular celebrations become prime targets to be asset stripped for the fun and feel-good elements. On the screen is an excerpt from a long piece published in Wall Street Journal a while ago. It speaks about not only the European appropriation of Holi, but more importantly, the fight among organizers for the revenue stream from this very well-loved, well-attended, but de-Hinduized Holi event. We can see such examples of ticketed de-Hinduized Holi, Navratri, Diwali all around us. It's fairly common. It makes because it is so profitable, these things actually is becoming more and more surfeit. So this is another example. Of profiting of erasure. So color runs are de-Hinduized secular events that asset strips and appropriates elements from Holi, and it is estimated to have generated about $5 million in 2019 alone. Similarly, we estimate a medium-sized garba in New Jersey to rake in a revenue of about 50 to 70,000 on one evening, with tens of events happening around in New Jersey alone during the season. And the most problematic part of garba is now the Bollywood garba that's become quite popular, where Devi is no longer the central element. Young diaspora Hindus grow up experience this version of de-linked version of Navratri, and it wouldn't be long before the historical memory of Devi and her importance during Navratri is lost.
So we've talked a lot about these various elements, and you can see quite clearly how this is cultural appropriation at its finest, leading quite deliberately to erasure. And that's where we saw a direct link with the Understanding Hinduphobia definitions that everyone is working off. And one line just jumped out to us in the definition, pro-social and reflexive aspects of Hindu traditions are ignored or attributed to outside non-Hindu influences. In our previous slides, we've attempted to show this quite directly happening. And further, that this discourse actively erases and denies the persecution of Hindus while disproportionately painting Hindus as violent. We touched upon the violence being ignored in terms of like the South Asification of the festivals, and we're going to explore a little bit on how this is then used to further Hinduism in negative lights. But I think we talked about why it's insidious, right? And why it's so easy to ignore, because it sounds very fun and easy, right? You sound a little crazy when you start to push back against these things. What's wrong with calling Diwali Festival of Lights or Holi as a festival of colors? It is kind of technically correct. But when it becomes so reductive, we've seen the trend before of how it happens, right? We've seen this happen in yoga, which started off in in an innocuous way, and it today has become so de-Hinduized that we have these ridiculous things like beer yoga, goat yoga, Christian yoga. So how far can the erasure of our festivals go? That's something we can look at.
This is the mechanism we were talking about earlier. This is just a flowchart for those who get excited looking at flowcharts like me. Extending Galton's framework on cultural violence, we see that de-Hinduizing and delinking Hindu festival makes it easier to asset strip, erase, and appropriate Hindu festivals. The impact will be long-lasting, and not only the loss of feel-good elements and fun elements from Hindu festival, but that element makes it easier to introduce fear, reinforce negative stereotypes and tropes. And going by the paradigm of cultural violence, eventually justify and legitimate violence. And of course, we should not miss the loss of generational memory of traditions associated with our festivals. Talking about the impact here with us is Abhi, who will be sharing his experience as a second generation diaspora Hindu.
Namaste, everyone. So I currently sit as the founder and president of my school's Hindu Student Council chapter. Till date, we have hosted 3 events, 2 Diwali nights and 1 Hindu New Year night. For our first Diwali night, we were asked to call it the Festival of Lights, not Diwali, by various South Asian student associations and our school administration in order to make this more inclusion focused, because they didn't want to risk other minorities, quote unquote, being felt left out by calling this by the original name. For our Hindu New Year night, we were told to call it the South Asian New Year, not Hindu New Year, to make it appealing to other faiths. In particular, members of the Muslim Student Association approached me and said, "Can you call it this? Otherwise, we won't be able to attend because it is haram for us to attend." And this almost seemed like they were essentially trying to de-Hinduize the festival as an excuse for them to be able to get to party at what is supposed to be a religious celebration for us. This year alone, we were asked to hold pro-Palestinian and Kashmir separatist protests at Diwali. As a Kashmiri Hindu, not only was this extremely offensive to me, but it was also extremely bad tasted. Why are we expected to have these protests at our religious festivals when we are supposed to be celebrating and coming together as a culture and being recognizing all the different parts of our culture? We informally surveyed our students and the board, and we found there to be great signs of what are we doing? Why are we allowing this? And people were feeling discomforted by the fact that our festivals were being turned into such tokens for others to be able to come and advertise their own agenda without taking into account the fact that we have important cultural significance to these festivals. It all comes down to the point that we as a whole in high schools are allowing our own cultures, our own festivals to be stripped away from their original Hindu identity, which not only made me personally feel uncomfortable, but based off an informal survey, we could see that our board members, our general board, our general body, felt extremely, extremely confused as to the fact of these are Hindu festivals. Why are we allowing such things to happen? Why are people even bringing about such things?
So I think the survey that Abhi mentioned showed that, while there is generally a lot of confusion, there is, most kids tend to, it's the path of least resistance. And so when you have festivals that are being celebrated in a de-Hinduized, secularized manner, it goes on to create a lot of misinformation and, basically a lack of information on what the festival is really about. Not just among the Hindu kids, but the non-Hindu kids, because, we are living we are a small minority among a larger minority. So our actions or the actions that we are made to take influence not just us, but the world around us. And so with that kind of wide level ignorance that prevails in schools and in the media, it kind of becomes easy for actors with subverted interests to take actions that then turn these festivals even further from secularizing them to actually making them something that people get ashamed of, to turning them into negative events, as I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience are familiar with these snapshots and events. But we've had Holi being called a oppressive casteist festival for several years now, and there has been a campaign called Holi Against Hindutva that has been running specifically on college campuses, elite college campuses being the leader on them. That has a very negative effect. We've talked to students who've said basically they've dialed back their celebrations of Holi. They've decided not to host offer food at their celebrations because ordering vegetarian food would open them up to allegations of casteism. And Diwali is also coming under attack now. So the flow chart that Dr. Raj showed earlier kind of showed how it goes from simple appropriation and secularization to actually turning the festivals on their head and making them something that to become fearful of. But if we look for, and that's already happening, the fear factor has already come in, even among folks who understand the festival, because the association of Diwali with air pollution and firecrackers with danger is pretty strong in the diaspora, also in India. And, it's almost a general acceptance that Diwali is a somewhat dangerous festival that you need to get through. But now the same thing has started happening in Holi. For the last few years, I've seen a number of greetings come through at telling me to have a safe and colorful Holi. And I was very shocked when I first saw this message. I was like, what is unsafe about Holi now? But you can start to see where these were messages were coming not from activists. These were coming from, people in India, first generation immigrants here. So they're just picking up on the agendas that are being pushed, and the subversion that is happening is even affecting people in the know, and making it easier to introduce fear. So, where does this all take us? We've talked a lot about erasure, right? But erasure can also be challenged. And I think it needs to be challenged. And I wanted to close with an example of one successful challenge that was mounted for Holi Against Hindutva, which was organized in April of 2024 at Oberlin College in Cleveland. And a lot of young student organizations flagged it, and the community began to take action. But there was a small group of volunteers in Cleveland who decided to take it a step further. When the university did not respond to emails and calls, the things we Hindus normally do, they decided that they were going to make a stand against erasure, and they decided to go to the event and put up a very peaceful and dignified protest to sort of ensure that this narrative can be challenged and that our voices get heard. And while there was never full success, we consider it quite important that their presence there forced the organizers to acknowledge them, to take notice. It forced the college newspaper to acknowledge them and include their viewpoint, because in most liberal progressive colleges, we just have to deal with a blanket fog of ignorance or being ignored. But in this case, the college paper did take note of them, and even the speaker at the event, we pulled out a quote of what he wrote in the paper. He said, yeah, I acknowledge that perhaps the event could have been less provocatively titled. Well, we 100% agree. Do your activism, but leave our festivals out of it. So I want to close with that as an example of something that we're all familiar with, which is Dharmo Rakshati Rakshitaha. It's not just important to study the erasure and understand what's going on. That's obviously a very important first step. But we hope that this study will also give everybody the fodder to sort of go and take the next step, to understand it more deeply, but to also prep for action. With that, I will close. Thank you all for having us. Namaste.
Thank you, Smita ji, Pushpita ji, Abhimanyu ji, for this powerful presentation. The stories and experiences shared today remind us that erasure is not just historical, it is happening now in real time to our youth. Hindu festivals and traditions are more than dates on a calendar. They're expressions of our civilizational identity, our sense of belonging, and our connection to something larger than ourselves. When these celebrations are erased or distorted, it sends a message that our culture is not welcome in shared public spaces. The insights from today's panel remind us of why awareness and advocacy are essential. Recognizing and calling out these patterns of exclusion is the first step towards ensuring that future generations of Hindu students do not have to fight just to exist and celebrate openly. So with that, let's give another round of thanks to Dr. Smita Raj, Dr. Pushpita Prasad ji, and Abhimanyu Gupta ji for their important work in raising awareness and advocating for Hindu students.